All right, going to respond to Dr. William Lane Craig's video, The Rise of Antinatalism. See what happens.
Craig, I think we could probably ignore this. It's just a very depressing view of life from some people who just really need some help, except that it really seems to be growing as a movement.
Well, I mean, if you can ignore it, why are you making a video about it? And, you're depressed ad hominem. No, deal with the argument. Why do people never deal with the damn argument? It's always nonsense.
The Guardian and others are reporting on the rise of antinatalism. Now, you can see from the title there what that is, and that is we need to quit having children because we are polluting the planet, and the Earth needs to return back to its pristine condition of not having people on it because we've messed it up.
No, that's not it. It's really simple. Nothing likes to be harmed. Harm is a negative valence in consciousness, and the comparative relief is available, but the only thing that seeks a comparative relief is something that has been brought into existence with the capacity to be harmed. None of it's necessary. It's avoidable by refraining from reproducing. Birth is a negative value. That's all antinatalism is. Anything else has nothing to do with it. Environment, sure, it's true. It's true about the environment, but that is not what antinatalism is about. Certainly not necessarily. You have to start talking about other things, to start talking about that and why it might matter to things. But yeah, let's see. For crying out loud.
It up, the antinatalist. So the adherents of this, according to the article, view life not as a gift and a miracle, but a harm and an imposition. And their notion that having children may be a bad idea seems to be gaining mainstream popularity. And then they talk about Raphael Samuel, who...
What do you mean by miracle? I mean, rare event? Yeah, I mean, if you try to look at everything in the cosmos that we can measure, it seems that life is pretty rare. Biological life that we can detect, sure. But if you mean by miracle, you mean, I don't know what you mean, some kind of event that, I don't know, I just don't know what other practical use of the word miracle might describe anything. If you mean something that is impossible, clearly it's not impossible because it's happened. If you do some divine thing, you haven't demonstrated that there's a God, blah, 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 all the fairy tale nonsense around gods. None of that matters. It is demonstrable that birth is not necessary, and it always seems to lead to the harm, pain, suffering, and death. The thing that you make can't be consulted about the natural selection-based genetic lottery you're imposing upon it. It is an imposition. It's actually an infliction. It can't be a gift. There's nothing there until you create it that has the capacity to appreciate a gift or to even evaluate whether or not something's a gift. It is irresponsible. If responsibility means anything coherent that we can demonstrate, it is irresponsible to inflict harm on something just so you can say, but you also get the goods. Well, nothing cares about whether or not it gets quote-unquote comparative relief that would be something it describes as good until you make the necessary conditions, or at least the sufficient conditions for it to seek the relief. You don't have to do that. Why are you doing it? Antinatalists are simply saying, hey, this sucks. It leads to harm. It's not necessary. What's the justification for doing it? None of you guys ever have met your burden of proof. So you need to justify doing it. Otherwise, you're demonstrating that you just don't care about whether or not it's justified.
Up, the antinatalist. So the adherents of this, according to the article, view life not as a gift and a miracle, but a harm and an imposition. And their notion that having children may be a bad idea seems to be gaining mainstream popularity. And then they talk about Raphael Samuel, who has kind of coined the phrase antinatalist. He believes it's wrong to bring new people into the world without their consent. Well, that's kind of hard right there to do.
Well, which would mean that it is always wrong to procreate on this view, that parents have an ethical obligation not to have children. So this is a much more radical view, Kevin, than the view that the world is such a terrible place, we shouldn't have kids and bring them into this world because they might suffer, and things of that sort of practical concern. This is a weird ethical argument that to bring another person into being without his consent is immoral.
Sure, but I mean, weird, radical, arguing the arguer and not the argument. You're arguing irrelevant shit, really. That has nothing to do with it. I mean, it's either valid and sound or it isn't. Sure seems to be pretty sound, as far as I can tell. If nothing is born, there isn't anything that's going to suffer and die. You gotta pull the trigger, and you gotta pull the genetic trigger and make it born before it has the chance to suffer and die, and look for the relief of its pain and negative valences. Why are you doing that? Simple. Why are you doing that? Knock it off.
It is an unethical act to make another person exist who didn't ask to be created. And so parents who have children are behaving unethically.
Yeah, it does get stranger.
Are there such things as parents who don't have children? There's something strange going on there. Who knows?
Bill, in that he's got a following. He's kind of the guru of this. He's 27 years old, and he was going to sue his parents for begetting him. It was not our decision to be born, he told the BBC. Human existence is totally pointless.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't think suing your parents is a smart thing to do. As I understand it, he was trying to raise awareness around the central topic. And, saying you're going to sue your parents is, in social media, it's a good way to get attention, I guess. But it's not the approach that I would take. I think it's unnecessarily provocative and brings along a bunch of unnecessary baggage that kind of distracts from the main problem, really. Sure, it gets attention, but I guess if you believe that even negative attention, negative press or whatever, if you think that that's useful, I guess. I don't know.
Less, he said.
Yes. Now there, Kevin, we see the atheistic underpinnings of antinatalism, don't we? I've argued.
Yeah. No, I just have, there's nothing inherently atheistic about antinatalism. I have a video in which you've already seen it probably, in which I've argued against Matt Dillahunty. He's far more rigorous than this, attempt to deal with antinatalism. So, no. And the idea that, what's with this idea that meaning, sure, the gentleman that they're critiquing here thinks that life is totally meaningless. What do you think he means by that? Clearly, if he's meaning something, it's not saying that meaning is impossible or doesn't exist at all. It's just that you can't stretch it to some absolute totality. Why do you even want to do that? What's the point? How do you think that happens? If it means something, it means something to us intersubjectively because we have similar enough experiences. We can engage in similar enough abstractions on sensory experience and engage in similar enough mouth noises and squiggles to represent those things, those abstractions. So that seems to be, meaning is limited and mesoscopic. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means you can't stretch it to the totality of existence. And I don't see how a God fixes that. You can say that somehow God makes life not absurd. No, it's a goalpost shift to God. God doesn't explain anything. Any question that you ask that you think because God answers, you can ask, well, why does God explain that? And Dr. Craig's tactic is I've seen him, he routinely just retreats to, well, it's God's nature, it's God's nature, it's God's nature. Doesn't explain jack shit.
Extensively, that if God does not exist, then life is indeed absurd, without ultimate meaning, value, or purpose. And these antinatalists, I think, presuppose the truth of atheism and therefore think that life is utterly pointless and that it's therefore immoral to impose such a pointless existence upon another creature.
Well, no, I mean, if you want to talk about morality, you don't have to. It's just harm, and it's not, even if existence were pointless, the only thing that seeks a point is something that's seeking the relief of harm states. So, as far as I can tell, So if you're going to talk about the immorality of it, it's the infliction of the unnecessary harm. And it may be the case that if it were possible to create experiences without any negative valences, without any harms, I don't see how anybody could raise an ethical objection to it, other than that it can't consent, and that is important. You guys seem to laugh about that glibly, like you think it's a joke. I can guarantee you would balk at a violation of your consent that produces harm. But anyway, let's see what else they have to say. Well,
upon another creature.
He says that life, even under the best of circumstances, is not a gift or a miracle, but rather a harm and an imposition. According to this logic, the question of whether to have a child is not just a personal choice, but an ethical one. And the answer is always no.
Yes. So I think what that would imply, Kevin, that would imply that the human race ought to go extinct in one generation, that no one should procreate, no one should have children, and that therefore the current generation of children is the last that will ever exist. The human race should go extinct in one generation.
This isn't just in the UK, and as we'll see here in a minute, in South Africa, but in Dallas, you're the friendly antinatalist.
Right, we're just talking about the consequences of if it were taken seriously by all of humans, which will probably never happen. I don't see how it could happen. Humans, we suffer from meta-narrative limitations on the contents of consciousness as a way of coping with the horror, the sheer horror of our existence. Authors like H.P. Lovecraft have pointed this out. Thomas Ligotti, other people probably prior to them have pointed it out, and I don't think anyone's pointed it out quite in the way that they have. But I don't know. It's
has a YouTube video congratulating Samuel. And she says, "We owe you a big round of applause. It feels like we've arrived. It feels like the big time." In other words, this view, this antinatalistic view. Obviously, Bill, one of the reasons this is probably going mainstream is it's in the context of what everybody's upset about these days. Global warming.
Mainstream? No, I don't think so. I mean, sure, it's getting more attention, but you got the internet. That's going to happen.
Climate change and so on. And so this is your way of protesting.
Yes, and some of them do seem to have an antinatalism that is born out of not ethical concerns, but rather these practical concerns, that the planet is warming, the future is bleak. There are probably thousands of terrified children who think that their generation is the last because of climate change. And so some of these antinatalists are arguing that it's wrong to bring kids into a world like that. I remember when Jan and I were a young married couple trying to decide whether to have children or not, one had to ask that issue, is this a world in which we want to bring children? And we said, yes, it is. That would be fine, and that things are not so dire that you couldn't have children.
I wonder if every generation has kind of asked that question.
I'm sure that's true, that you always ask yourself whether or not this is really a wise thing to do. Yeah. Surely most reflective parents ask themselves that question.
Okay.
Yeah, but how did you arrive at your answer, your conclusion? How did you justify it? And whether or not, it's how do you get past the fact that, I wanted kids when I was younger. I was messing around, and I realized that I had no justification for making another person that who would experience pain, suffering, and whatever it's like to die. And there's no way to get around the fact that doing that, in doing that, you are an accessory to all of the pain, suffering, and dying that they experience. I mean, there's no way around that as far as I can tell. And looking for a way around it is, I think, a strange thing to do. It's a very barbaric thing to do. It's odd. I don't know how anybody actually goes through with it. So I'm skeptical that you reflected on it really at all. Beyond, oh, well, everybody else seems to be doing it. Maybe. I don't know.
It says what is similar about both antinatalist and climate activists is that they are seeing an increase in attention. They're seeing an increase in attention due to general pessimism about the state of the world, giving both more opportunities to gain support. Okay.
It seems to be due to the increased access to information and an ability to make less biased analyses of the data available to us. It's the internet. Pessimism is a posteriori in every case that I've seen. No one that I've ever seen in any of the literature starts out with shit's bad, therefore pessimism. A priori, it's I would like, shit's great, and then the shit's great experience gets destroyed by experience. It gets falsified, and oh, it's not as great as I was led to believe. Actually, it sucks. So I don't know.
Okay. In 2006, the South African philosopher David Benatar wrote a book which is widely credited as introducing the term antinatalism in Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence. Benatar quotes, the Greek tragedian Sophocles, never to have been born is best, but if we must see the light, the next best is quickly returning whence we came.
It is such a dark view of life because it draws out the logical consequences of atheism. And in one sense, what we ought to say to these people is, yes, given your worldview, given the denial of the existence of God, the world is a very bleak place. And invite them to think again about whether or not maybe God really does exist and life does have meaning and purpose and value.
Yeah, you've failed to demonstrate that a God exists. You've also failed to demonstrate how, if it did exist, it would change what meaning and value happens. Why would you care if there is a God and it doesn't want you to do this or that with your dick or your vagina or whatever, and you do it? The only thing you're concerned with is whether or not it's going to hurt you, and how the degree to which it's going to hurt you. So it always comes down to ouch, sucks, and nothing wants to experience it. Anything, even masochists, if they could get their dopamine fix and their fitness signaling hit, if they could get it without actually having to experience the pain, they would. If nothing likes pain, nothing wants to experience it. It is an aversion state in consciousness. It's a repulsion, right? Period. If you're going to sit there and tell me, well, no, it's not really pain, or it's I'm not really, it's not bad, then you're not talking about pain. If it's something that you're not averse to, that's not pain. Regardless of the capacity to endure it. This is the same problem that Matt Dillahunty had with his video, and he's an atheist. So there's clearly nothing. Antinatalism has nothing to do with atheism.
Yeah. And Bill, this article mentions next another strain of this thought that I remember when I was a little kid. When I was a little kid, everybody was talking about population growth.
Yes.
We've got to stop. That was, 1968, 69.
Right, the population
70.
bomb.
Yeah. And so that was a strain of it. And all the ecological crisis that was going on there, quit having kids. And, this goes further. Benatar is discouraging reproduction, and these guys are saying don't have children and so on. And the strain that I hear as well, Bill, is because we need to turn the world back into its beautiful, pristine place. Wouldn't that?
The strain. It's a strain, is it? Fascinating.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Now, what's incoherent about it is that who's going to be there to see how wonderful it is? You can't observe the wonder of it. You can't enjoy what you've accomplished.
Right.
And all that's going to be left is some cockroaches and lizards, and you're sacrificing your humanity and the human race so that they can scurry around.
Yeah, they haven't weighed, I think, properly in their minds the great goods that would be given up in the human.
Oh boy, here comes the sampling bias. The count the hits and ignore the gigantic glut of agonies that falsify your claim, and assume that good is some intrinsic thing rather than a comparison to how bad shit can get.
Race going extinct, such as aesthetic and cultural and moral achievements. That the world has far more goods in it than it does evil. Otherwise, everyone would commit suicide. But they don't. People generally think life is worth living, and when things are going rough, they hope for the future, that things will improve. So on balance, there's much more good in life than bad. And they would rob us of all of that by saying that we should all go extinct.
No. He's conflating or confusing, whatever the freaking right word is. He's confused antinatalism with pro-mortalism, or some kind of murder, killing, or removal of the capacity to experience things by imposition. No. It is true that if everybody stopped reproducing, the species would go extinct. It's going to go extinct no matter what we do. The point is, it doesn't have to be the natural agony that will happen if we keep reproducing in the natural way, making more frail, suffering, dying things. Some kind of posthumanism might be possible, but you're never going to get there making more, using natural selection. It's just never going to happen. And any intelligent God ought to have figured that out by now. I don't know. It would seem. And no, this delusional notion that there's more good than bad in life, if you're going to talk about good and bad being harm and the benefit of the relief of harm, or bad and good, rather, correspondingly being harm and the relief of harm, no. Clearly, no. It's just delusional. Maybe for modern, relatively wealthy humans with a lot of luck, it may feel like that for the younger part of your life, but you haven't died yet. And this is a just bizarre sampling bias, one that is so stupid that it's hard to take seriously. To count to the one tiny fraction of a percent that is doing well, and just ignore the mountain of predation, slaughter, the trillions of discrete unitary subjects of experience that have lived in the past, not just humans, all life, and that have had their faces and guts ripped out by acts of predation, just so genes can proliferate. No. The current natural state of things and the state of them in the past is not a greater good. It's a profound horror that nothing wants to experience.
And there goes all of the art, all of the music, the dance, all of these cultural achievements. It all goes out the window.
No. It would still be here as long as we're here. This generation, whatever the last generation is, it would still, that doesn't go. You can still experience that. That's like I don't know what that is. You say you can't enjoy a piece of cake and a confectionery because you're going to eat the last bite. No, you can still enjoy it. The last bite's going to come. It's just whether or not that bite is excruciating. It doesn't have to be, and there's no one missing the art and the beautiful, profound wisdom of being alive until, we create them and then deprive them of it. There's nothing that's longing to be created. There's nothing that's longing to be incarnated as a frail, suffering, dying piece of pain meat. That's delusional. So nothing is going to miss out on anything, or nothing is. There isn't anything that's going to miss out on anything. I don't know. It's incoherent. The delusional notion that he's espousing is just nauseatingly incoherent.
This really made me chuckle, Bill, on page 2, halfway down. The author of this article interviewed Benatar, who wrote this book, and said, Benatar told me recently that he has heard from many readers of his book who have often felt that they were alone in the world. It was a great comfort to them to read a philosophical defense of a view they found intuitively correct. In other words, that they're finding other people and community. Well, there must be something to having a community and being all together.
Right. Exactly what you want to do away with.
Now let's get rid of each other.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's bizarre. That's neat, but that has nothing to do with whether or not birth is the pathway to all harms here. I personally don't care about community or any of that stuff, but some people do, and that's just a natural human thing. That's not. I don't know what they're trying to say there. It can entirely be the case that frail, suffering, dying humans get relief from community. That's not a falsification of antinatalism. Nowhere are they saying that they want to make more humans. Again, I don't personally understand the need for ad populum support because how many people believe whether or not a claim is true or whether they form a community around it is irrelevant to whether or not the proposition is true or the claim is true.
And I'm not sure you made it clear to our readers, but these antinatalists think not only humans, but that all sentient beings should go extinct. That there shouldn't be any giraffes or elephants or rhinoceroses or monkeys, that all sentient life should go extinct. These people are really wacko.
Yeah, that's beyond even some of the stuff I heard. I heard that, we need to go because, and let the animals, rule again or whatever, or the plants. Mm-hmm. But this is really any sentient being because of the harm of life, the trials of life.
Well, I mean, where's the justification for doing it? Where's that? I haven't heard it. Same thing as I've never heard any coherent sound evidence for the existence of any of these gods. Where is it? Rather than straw manning and ad hominem and lying about antinatalism and making glib mocking noises, chimp noises about it, why don't you deal with it? Deal with the simple, demonstrable fact that the things you rape into existence can't consent to any of it, and they're going to suffer and they're going to die as a result of it. And you don't have to do it. Sure, extinction's a thing that you'd have to deal with. That's not a thing to just glibly gloss over. That's a problem. But it's not insurmountable.
Dana Wells is the Dallas-based YouTuber. She said she felt validated by Benatar's book. About 5 years ago, she reunited with her biological brother. She was adopted, and he grilled her about why she didn't have children. And feeling annoyed after the meeting, she searched online for books. And she came up with this child-free theory, this antinatalism. And she began to see that this life game is an imposition. For her, it was simple. Living things can be harmed. Non-living things cannot be harmed. Man, she's really a sad individual, it would seem to me.
Yeah,
I haven't seen her on YouTube.
It is tragic when you really think about it. Non-living beings, since there are no such beings, cannot experience goods either. They cannot experience love or relations. So she's willing to give up all of that. The funny thing is... No. It's not about losing your capacity or the capacity for things that currently exist. It's not about forcing them to lose love or meaning or purpose or goals or the hero's journey meta-narratives about overcoming pain and suffering. It's about not making more messes that are going to seek those things. That's the problem. You guys are just weirdly missing it. If I didn't know better or believe better, I think you were desperately trying not to pay attention to it. And I want to make this clear. I don't think anyone is obligated to have children. If a couple chooses not to have children, that's their personal choice. And I don't see why she has to justify her personal choice by turning it into an ideology, which would impose that choice on everyone else and all of humanity.
Yeah. And some people try to make some theology out of this, don't they, Bill? That, it's a mandate to procreate and have children.
In general, I think that's true.
You might get that from the creation mandate in Genesis,
right.
But New Testament teaching, you're not really going to get that.
Right. It's in Genesis that the man is put on the earth and commanded to be fruitful and multiply. But that's a general mandate, and I don't think that means that every person has to carry out that mandate. Our Lord was celibate and never married. The Apostle Paul apparently never married. So I think whether one chooses to marry and have children is a personal choice.
Well, there seems to be three main groups here. One is the antinatalists. They believe creating new life is always wrong. Then there's the child-free group. They don't want kids themselves, but don't necessarily consider procreation unethical. And then the denatalists, they disapprove of procreation only under certain conditions, such as people with genetic disabilities that they will pass on to offspring. That's scary. And this disapproval doesn't usually transfer to racial or ethnic groups.
That does raise the question of whether these denatalists are thinking of this simply in terms of a personal decision. For example, parents who know that they both have, say, recessive genes that would result in a serious genetic illness for their child, and so choose not to have children. Or are they imposing this upon people who have a probability of having a deformed child? In that case, this is eugenics. It's trying to manufacture a pure race by weeding out those who have these genetic impurities, in which case, Kevin, I myself would have been weeded out and would not exist.
Yeah, well, there you go. One more quick thing. Bill, it gets pretty complicated here. She says that there's a rift between the vegan antinatalist and the non-vegan antinatalist. The non-vegan antinatalist, they want animals around because they need to eat them.
Put them out of existence. Eat them.
And their misery. The vegan antinatalists, they want to keep the plant. Well, keep the plants around, but why? I mean, if you're not going to be there to eat them, see, it's just really convoluted. Anyway, the challenge, they're really big about suffering. And causing harm, and they must be suffering people, perhaps, Bill. Because he says the challenge for antinatalists, especially those who believe that.
Is there any such thing as a person who doesn't suffer to some degree? I mean, I grant there's congenital insensitivity, and in the very rare case, there are people who don't report any anxiety who have that, but those are very rare. Everything still dies, and the whole thing here has just been a weird, the usual glib bunch of noise.
Not only humans, but other species would be better off non-existent. Is how to achieve their goals without imposing additional.
It's not better off non-existent. It would be better never to have created them, right? Dying is worse than being alive. I'm not talking about after you've died. The experience of dying is demonstrably worse than being alive. It's not about killing things or making it so that they no longer exist in an ex materia sense, and the material from which they're composed turns into something else, which is not a presupposition, it's a description, a posteriori. The issue is, hey, we're making unnecessary harm, not necessary, so why are we doing that? Nobody's given a sound reason. Just a bunch of chimp noises. So we don't have to do it. So let's stop. That's not denying anything that exists, any of the benefits that we think come from existing.
Suffering. So euthanasia is out, and executing everybody's out, or setting off nuclear weapons is out, or starvation is out. So how are we going to do this?
Yes, if it's to be done humanely, their only recourse would be persuasion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I have an answer to that, but you don't want to hear it. And I agree with you that it's a horrible thing to have to think about. It's not something that you should glibly undertake and just say, oh, it's going to be easy. No.
They need to have these movements, such as their founding, in order to persuade everyone not to have children.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea of going on a bunch of crusades, and making antinatalist theocracies, I don't know what that would be like, but is dashing the babies' heads against rocks, Psalms 139:7 or whichever psalm it was. Yeah, tell me about the futility of trying to persuade people when your only other option is violence, and violence is shown to never actually convince anything. It doesn't solve problems. All it's ever done is treat some of the symptoms of the underlying problem.
Otherwise, they're going to be robbing people of their personal liberties.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if it were the case that somehow some antinatalist regime came to power, you have not demonstrated that you have the right or the liberty to violate something into existence that's going to suffer and die for your actions. just to satiate your own whims. So, you know, I don't understand what you're doing.
Well, they're getting into even to the pop culture on the last page here. There's the British singer-songwriter Blythe Pepino. She's organizing a group called Birth Strike, made up of about 600 people globally right now who refuse to have children as a result of the climate breakdown.
Yeah, it's not antinatalism.
She does a lot of music, the whole thing. And then there's another group called Extinction Rebellion,
That's
which is
not
protesting
antinatalism.
against the threatened extinction of millions of species, potentially including our own. But by contrast, true antinatalist extinction is the dream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's very strange, isn't it? The inner contradictions.
Bill, I guess in conclusion today, perhaps this is a good opportunity for the gospel among a growing movement of antinatalists, that life
Who are
is worth
very
living.
hopeless.
Yeah. And perhaps we can offer them some hope, and that good, solid philosophy and theology from a Christian view on who humans are and what humanity is all about and what community is all about.
We all know
And
what
do
hope
away
is.
with all the sadness. Yes.
It's mistaking desire for probability. Yeah. So, anyway, nowhere did they address what antinatalism actually is. They strawman it. They do all the usual shenanigans. I kind of don't blame people because it's a horror. But anyway, that was a whole lot of fun. Thanks. We'll do another one here at some point.